Do I have to wear the headphones or the voice is okay? You can hear me?
Yeah, ma'am, I can hear you.
Okay. So I'll go ahead with my presentation.
Sound illa.
All right. So can you see my screen?
அவன் என்ன அவ பார்க்க தேவையில்லைல்ல என்ன அவ பார்க்கணும்னா அது
Can you all see the screen, guys? I can't see any of you, so you have to.
Yes, ma'am, I can see the screen now.
Okay. So we are finishing developmental pediatrics today. So first, last time we discussed how to really approach this, when a child comes. So now I'm going to discuss some common conditions that you will see when you go out to practice even pediatrics or medicine. So though it's a specialty, I feel that everybody should know about these things. It's not very theoretical and technical. There are lots of explanations in this. So if you don't understand something, please feel free to stop and ask me, okay? So first of all, nobody's growth and development is without challenges, okay? So child development, like your own growth, is not linear. It's not that a child started walking, the child has learned to talk, that means he'll never have problems in his life. There are different stages in a child's life when they will find uh, you know um, challenges in their growth and development. Like you guys know, right? You'll have a growth spurt just before puberty. So things like that, depending upon their age, their maturation, their experience, and the stimulation they get from their environment, children can have challenges at any time in their development. It's not like only the first 5 years or just the teenagers or just the toddler years that are challenging. Okay. So mostly as doctors, we'll be seeing only variations uh, for challenges that can happen in normal development. But sometimes these conditions, if you don't understand them properly, if you don't address them properly, they can impair learning and quality of life. So for example, if you're a teenager, all teenagers like to try risk taking behavior. We've all before, or even now in college, all of you have tried to ride the bike faster, you try to experiment something. So that's a normal behavior at your age and adolescence. But if you start abusing drugs at that time, then it has the potential to impair learning and your quality of life. So what really happens in the development should be understood properly, and you should know what is normal and when you have to really address the issue. Okay. So let's start with temper tantrums. Is there anyone who has not seen a temper tantrum? All of you have seen temper tantrum?
Yes, ma'am.
So can you tell me what are the common, when are temper tantrums common? Do you have any idea?
Like when a child doesn't get what she or he wants,
Okay. Right.
or she's angry with someone.
Okay. Yes. Children get really angry. We know to control anger. We know to mutter like this and do sarcasm. They don't know to do all that. So when they are really angry, they do that. Yes. What else? Think about your own temper tantrums. When do you really do it?
Lack of sleep, hunger.
Absolutely. Very valid. Very good answer. Any more?
No, ma'am.
Okay. So there are ages when temper tantrums are very common. Okay. So first is in the toddler years, and second we all know it's in the teenage years. And also in circumstances where rule following is very important, like suppose in school, it's very hard for some children to sit in the class and listen to the teacher. So in situations where there is rule, compulsive, forceful, rules are told to you and you have no choice, those are situations where your temper tantrums happen. Okay, when you want to have a choice and you are feeling that your choices are not given. So at the age of 1 to 3 years and during your teenage years, we are trying to have a unique identity. Like when a baby is until the age of 1 or 2 years, the baby is so close to the mother. The mother only addresses the baby's needs. So when the mother feels that something is good for the child, she tells or she gives. But after 1 year, the children want to express themselves. They want to give their own autonomy to things. They want to try new things. They want to know why it's not like that. Why can't I do like this? Why can't I eat my favorite chocolate only every day? So when they don't know limits. So, and they also want to be individual. They want to have a separate identity of their own. So in that stages of development, in toddler years and in adolescent years, it is very common to have temper tantrums. And also when people are not able to understand rules and limitations, when they are confused about that. So many children who, they have a problem, they have any condition like ADHD, or they are not so bright in studies, all those children who are prone to have frustration, they will get temper tantrums. And it's very important, like you pointed out, whoever is doing temper tantrum, first we have to see whether they are sleeping properly, fed properly, they don't have any other problem that they are not able to communicate to you. Like for instance, they went to some place and saw something scary, they are not able to tell you. You always should understand and do not punish a temper tantrum. Okay, the children who have a temper tantrum, they feel helpless and frustrated. Children don't manipulate us. So don't follow this old idea that if you cry, I'll make you cry more. Don't try all that with children. Show love, show empathy to them whenever they are doing a tantrum. So we do not teach our children to avoid fighting by fighting with them. Don't attempt in any child, and don't discourage parents from fighting and punishing a child when they are doing a tantrum. Now there is something called meltdown. Have you seen a meltdown? Do you know what a meltdown is?
Crying after a temper tantrum.
So it is similar. Like the slide says, tantrum is a little mild if you don't really, handle it. If you pay a little bit of attention in the right way, it will subside. But when it is a meltdown, they will lose control. And when it starts, you can't stop it. So many children you have seen who have autism or have mental retardation, they will just start crying, and it will take a long time for them to get back to control. And that time, no matter how much you give them toys or give them anything, they will not be able to get their judgment back. So that is a meltdown. Okay. uh, so if you have a child who's having a tantrum or a meltdown, it's important for you to understand the difference. So don't expect that when somebody is really struggling in a meltdown, they will listen. And don't teach anything to a child when they are having a meltdown. When they are having a meltdown, when they are out of control, the best thing you can do is see that they don't get an injury anywhere. If they are doing tantrum, they will be careful so that they don't injure themselves. Even if they are head banging, they will do little, reasonably, that they don't get hurt really bad. But in a meltdown, they won't know where they are, and there is a chance that they will get seriously injured. So at that time, do not leave the child alone. Do not say cry, cry, and go away, and think that they are just doing it for attention's sake. They have a need. So do not think that children just do things to get attention. So we as pediatricians, we should teach parents more about guiding and teaching their children, and not just punishment, and meeting their anger with our anger. Okay. So always try to don't teach anything to a child when they are doing all these tantrums. When they are calm, help them to learn what is right from wrong, and try to keep them safe. You all had this class on seizure mimics, right? So did you see a breath holding spell?
Yes,
Did,
ma'am.
yeah. So even some kids, they go after a tantrum, they hold their breath. So even a breath holding spell has nothing to be worried about. Only you have to know the difference if it is happening without a precipitating tantrum like this. If you know that there is a definite cause and the child, when something is withheld from him, and only then he is having this spell. So even that is normal. There is no need to panic if a child has a breath holding spell. So I tried to get a video of a breath holding spell. Let me see. I'll play it to you a little later. So even other children, okay, you will see so many kids who get a complaint from school that they are very aggressive, that they are really not listening. So in developmental pediatrics, we don't call them bad children, okay. We always believe that their brain is not yet mature, and like adults, we don't punish them. So we always feel that somebody is aggressive, it means they have a difficulty with impulse control. Like they see a toy, they just want to take it and play. They don't care which place they are playing, they want to start playing. Then they don't know problem solving. Like if you tell them we want to go out, and that day there is no bus, or there is no cab is not coming, or something is happening and that plan can't happen, they don't know how to find an alternative. Their mind is fixed that I want to do this today and that's not happening, so they get upset. They don't know simple things like if a pencil is broken and they don't have sharpener, they can ask, they can, things like that. This doesn't come to their mind. So when there is no problem solving ability, they will get aggressive very easily. And also they don't know how to wait, that if they want their chocolate, they want it right now. And they don't know what is adjustment. Okay. Now, many kids are very smart, but many of them don't know what is negotiating. They don't think that there is an alternative to what they can choose. And they don't know how to, they know to communicate many for their daily life. They may be able to say that I want but I'm feeling scared. I'm really not able to understand this. That person is reminding me of something that I'm scared of, or something like that. They don't have that necessary language to communicate all this. And they also do not always know what is appropriate or expected in a given situation. Okay. They mostly copy us. They mostly copy what adults do. So that's why, many of them say, if your kid is shouting, do you shout at home? And they also don't know how to calm themselves. They sometimes want us to really hug them, but they don't know how to say that. So all these things, even if it's a teenager, even if it is someone who's older and who has a difficulty, we always think that does a person have these problems, and we don't simply punish them. Okay. And the treatment also is teaching all these things. So for instance, if some kid cannot wait, we try to teach the parents to tell them how to wait for 1 minute, wait for 2 minutes. First you do this, then we'll do that. Then negotiating also, we try to have many games where we can have so many alternatives, that what can we do when we have a power cut, what is our options. So things like that we try to teach in when we try to help these children. We don't really work so much on punishing what they do. We try to look for the need behind their behavior. So if somebody is uncooperative and not following rules and persistently hostile towards teachers and other authority figures, it's called oppositional defiant disorder. Okay. So they refuse to do what the teachers or adults say, and they talk very rudely. uh, Usually, this is not a isolated problem. They may have other conditions like a learning disability or an ADHD. So we just don't simply punish. We try to really examine them and find out what is their real problem. And then we try to remediate the problem instead of simply punishing them. So conduct disorder means they have broken rules, that is there in oppositional and defiant disorder. But if they have damaged property, or if they have harmed themselves or others, it becomes a conduct disorder. If they do it repetitively in spite of getting warning, it is a conduct disorder. And if they do something that is a crime according to the penal code, like theft or fire setting, then that is called juvenile delinquency. Okay. So they go to a remediation home. So these photos are from a remediation home in Chennai. So I have spent some time working with the boys here who had they were having a conduct disorder. But even in them, it's not that they're really bad kids. They're not like totally bad guys. It's very wrong to isolate them from the society and just decide that they are bad. Even they have problems in these issues, in impulse control, in negotiating. So even when they go to a remediation home, we try to think that they are good kids who have a potential, who don't have something to learn, and we try to teach them these things. So even when you guys go up and become doctors and start practicing, be open in your mind to try to understand beyond diagnosis. Just like this, it's very easy to make a diagnosis, but it's their life. Okay, so always look for an underlying problem before you address their behavior. So always, we talk about discipline. We say discipline is a better option than punishment. So stick to rules. We always advise parents that you have to stick to rules with toddlers, with teenagers, with everyone, and don't fight for everything. Fight, like you can't say all at once that I'm not going to show TV for you at all. You can't say I'm not going to give you a mobile at all, because everyone around their world, as parents, we are doing that. As adults, what we are doing. So really think, is my demand from the child reasonable? And try to praise them more when they do the right things, and set clear rules, and provide unconditional love. uh, so that's not a old boring saying. Unconditional love to children is very important. So another common thing is that the parents come and tell you is that unume saapradilla and enna kudthalum saapradilla. So this is a very common thing. Um, Even when they don't immediately jump to thinking that it's a behavioral problem, okay, always look for an underlying medical cause. Is the child sick, or is the child not gaining weight for any other medical reason? Does the child have any other nutritional deficiency? Please look at that. Even if it doesn't seem on the face that the child is, even if you think that the child is just acting, please check all these conditions. And all you need, and it's very important to tell the parents that just because the child is not eating, please don't force feed and treat the child with unhealthy sugary options that they like. So some of the tips that we give is give the child many options. In the toddler age, exposing the child to various kind of textures, various kind of tools to eat, and presenting the food in a different way is very important. Also encourage them to eat as a family. It's not that all of us are eating something good and giving the child boring food. So, and try to always model, what the child needs to eat. We also need to eat as adults in the house. So can you tell me a condition where even in teenagers, eating becomes very difficult? Hello?
Um, I don't know, ma'am.
Okay. So nowadays it's very common among teenagers. You guys heard of anorexia and bulimia?
Yeah, ma'am. Yeah, ma'am.
So can you guys, any of you tell me what's the difference between the two?
Uh, Anorexia is skipping food, and bulimia is binging on food.
Okay. So both of them are a difficult relationship with food, and it affects somebody's self-esteem. Okay, it's something to do with body image. It's a preoccupation of how we look and what we think we look at. So because of all the exposure in the media nowadays, very young children, not only girls, even boys, they have a particular image of uh, you know looking good, built up in their mind, and they really work at only the image. They don't care how they get it, and they also confuse good looks with health. Those who have anorexia, they starve on purpose, and they think that they are very fat, even though they may be looking really thin. So they are not able to allow themselves to eat. Okay, they prefer to starve, and sometimes it becomes very severe that they will have to be admitted and given enteral nutrition, and then made to eat. So in bulimia they have an urge to binge eat, and they also feel guilty after that. And they try to over exercise or to vomit or do anything to get rid of what they've eaten. They go through extreme guilt after they have eaten, and they are usually not very thin. So this is many things are not seen. These are all difficulties that a teenager may not really vocalize with you. But if you get to meet someone as a pediatrician and you're seeing the child through the years, try to speak to them about good health and good eating habits. So that is, I mean, that is also our responsibility to teach youngsters all these things. So this has long-term effects, okay, especially about their ability to concentrate. Besides that, their muscles become achy and the skin becomes dry and hair becomes thin, and you get things like constipation. In the long term, memory and bone strength gets affected. And in bulimia, there are lots of problems. Those of them who make themselves vomit, they have enamel erosion, they can have uh, esophageal ulcer and stuff like that. So it's not a good thing. And even to all of you, um, enjoy the body that you are gifted with always. And if you just focus on really erratic methods to look good, just because someone is making fun of you, it's not a good idea. So what do we do when someone has anorexia or bulimia? We try to really address the coexisting mental ill health. We try to really understand their trauma. And if something is really like the anxiety or the depression is very severe, then we try to medicate them. And we just can't make them eat all of a sudden if they are anorexic. So we try to build up, we try to supplement their vitamins, try to supplement their other essential things like zinc and magnesium minerals. And then we also encourage social and emotional support. This is not something that will go immediately, and very important is for us not to make fun of the people who have these conditions. They are struggling through intense emotional pain. So one other thing that is very common in childhood is anxiety. Okay, it doesn't look like the child is not going to tell you I'm scared. Many of them do, but they can also present in ways that uh, can't see very clearly. Can you tell me what separation anxiety is? Can someone tell me what is separation anxiety? What is anxiety, by the way? What's anxiety? What's anxiety?
And fear about something happening and stressing about it.
Okay. So we all don't know when COVID vaccine will come. So what we are experiencing is anxiety, right? When we go out, we don't know if you're going to catch the infection. So that is anxiety, a sort of uncertainty and fear that comes from uncertainty, and that becomes difficult for us to handle. That we are not able to just control it easily. So that is anxiety. When there is a certain uncertainty and we are not really sure, the fear that comes as a result of that is anxiety. So very small children, like in this picture, when they are separated for the first time, when their mother goes back to work, or when they go to a play group, what they undergo is separation anxiety. Okay? And phobias are specific fears. Like, can you, any of you give me an example for phobia?
Acrophobia.
Claustrophobia.
Yeah, great. So it's a fear, an exaggerated fear of a specific thing. Okay. And social anxiety. What do you think is social anxiety?
Interacting with others.
Yeah, so extreme, it's like an extreme form of shyness when we don't know. So when a social scenario, we don't know what will happen, what that person will say, how they are looking at us. So a real preoccupation with this is called social anxiety. And panic attack is when the anxiety becomes really severe. Some of us have palpitations, sweating, difficulty breathing, and some people even have a syncopal attack. So all that is all a form of anxiety. And sometimes bedwetting can happen. So whatever this is, do not make fun of the child. Don't say that you are always very scared. Oh my god, you did this. That's not going to help the child. And even you see this child sucking her thumb here. These are all ways in which they are communicating their helplessness to us. Do not make fun of them. Do not feel irritated by this behavior. So anxiety is a behavior which has so many deep underlying feelings. Okay. So when we treat children who have any struggle with their behavior, we always try to use this acronym of PACE. So we try to tell them things playfully. We try to accept every behavior. We don't first make them feel very bad about what they have done. And we try to be curious about why they did. Sometimes the reason in which they do something is very funny, it's very interesting, so they feel very bad when they start getting punished for it. Like last week, I know one kid, everyone was calling one boy elephant. Okay. And she wanted to make friends with that boy. She didn't know in that language that they were teasing him. So she went and called him, "Hi, elephant, play with me." And he cried and complained to the teacher. And she was called a bully. But actually, when we found out what it is, there was an issue in which she didn't know how to talk to him. So things like that, we should really think before we punish a child and be empathetic towards them. Sometimes kids say, I hate the world, I don't like anyone, everyone is bad. Uh, it's still okay. They're just experiencing these feelings for the first time. So with children, it's not like adults. We don't take all their words to heart. We try to really come down and pace our interaction with them and try to help them with whatever difficulty they have. So always, any aggressive behavior or anxious behavior, understanding the behavioral support, okay, without always sending them out, always labeling them as a bad person, as a difficult person, we avoid. And we always include the management of nutrition, sleep, recreation, and support. We should never if we think a kid is really bad in school and we don't leave him, we leave him and always think this child is never going to improve. We don't know what other problems he's really going through. And if he'll need to come back and tell us and that he's improving or things like that, we should always support him. We should never, just give up on them because they have a diagnosis that is like this. So thumb sucking till age 5 is really okay. We don't really scold kids who suck their thumb. It is actually a anxiety manifestation. But only thing, we'll try slowly after age 5, because when permanent teeth start coming in, their it can get as bad as this. Their palatal growth and their you know uh, orthodontic orientation may get affected. But even then, we try to reinforce only the positive behavior, give that child something else that gives them comfort, and tell them that, oh, you have not sucked your thumb for like 1 hour, very good, maybe you can do 2 hours tomorrow, and things like that. So we really don't punish we don't encourage putting all that bad smelling, bad tasting thing on their thumb and making them get scared. Okay. So you've heard about children grinding their teeth at night. Have you seen parents complain like this? Pallu kadikira night. Yeah.
Yes, ma'am. Like Not in the night time. Normally,
Get angry.
ma'am.
Yeah, so a lot of kids do that. Okay, they clench and they get really angry. So even that, we really don't worry about it so much. Only that he keeps doing it, it's going to start paining. I have never seen this temporomandibular joint disease in any of the kids, but I think some of them are really frustrated and they get it. So even then, it doesn't mean that the child has worms in their stomach. Okay, it's not true. It's just an anxiety and uh, underlying anxiety problem, and so the parents have to really sit down and talk to their kids and try to understand what the reason is. Toilet training and bed wetting is also a common issue in pediatrics. So you know uh, bladder control day and night is achieved only around 6 years. So till that, we don't really scold them if they occasionally have an accident. And even toilet training, we start only after 2 to 2.5 years. So it's really wrong if we start forcing children to do something before the age in which their brain is ready for it. If we force them when they are not ready, definitely they will struggle with it, and the struggle becomes something that brings them shame and affects their self-esteem, and it carries on to other areas in their life. So first, when we do something, we have to really know, is the child ready to learn this skill? Okay. So again, with bed wetting, we also do not shame the child, first, more importantly, and we don't get frustrated and call them names just because they do it, because we have to understand that they also feel very bad. So when somebody comes with you with this complaint, you have to really know whether the child is first ready to be trained, and then whether it is nocturnal or diurnal. So if it is happening only at night, then there are other reasons. Like, for example, this is not a question for your MBBS, but I'll just give you in brief. This hormone vasopressin, yeah, the anti-diuretic hormone.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, so some of them do not produce optimal levels of it. So that can cause them to, bedwet only at night. And sometimes the bladder itself is an overactive bladder. So sometimes even if they have a small volume of urine, they will not be able to wait till the bladder is completely full. So there are conditions like that. So because of that, they may have only at night. Only when they are sleeping, this sensitivity may not be there. But if it is happening during the day also, then there may be a local cause. It may be a urinary tract infection. It may be another, um, you know, a thing like pinworms or anything like that. So we really think whether there are other symptoms. Okay. And usually, if it is um, there are no other conditions and only normal voiding that is occurring without with a significant amount of urine, we really don't worry. If there is something like a daytime, um, if they have accidents even during the day, and there is constipation or there is even encoparesis, and if a child has been toilet trained and for 6 months at least they have not had an episode of bedwetting and they have it again, then it's a very likely to be a secondary cause. Okay, likely to be an infection or a psychological trauma or any other chronic disease. Even diabetes can present. Type 2 diabetes very rarely can present in children like this. So we rule out if there are any secondary causes, and then otherwise, if nothing is there, lifestyle modifications and bed medications have proven to be beneficial. So we emphasize on a good bedtime routine, no drinking too much water and fluids just before sleep. And then we ask them to get up at a specific time. If we think that the child is really bedwetting at a certain time, we notice it and try to wake them up at that time consistently for a few days, so that they remember that sensation and they go and go to the toilet. And there are some alarms also which have a sensor like this, so when the underwear is just a little wet, there the child can get a sort of alarm over and then go to the bathroom. If all else doesn't work, we have medications. We have desmopressin. It comes as a nasal spray. So we have a lot of alternatives to bedwetting. We have a lot of options to handle it. So many children, they have some habits like nail biting, like I showed you in the picture. So some of them have tics. So did sir show you tics in the seizure videos?
No, ma'am. No.
Okay, so tics actually start when there is any problem. Okay, like see this boy, he might have had like suppose you have a sty or something, and you're used to keeping it like this, and then it becomes a habit for you just to do like this. You know, many children, they start holding their ears or something like that. It's very common. So till 5 years of age, we really don't correct those things. And but some of them, they do really things like that. So those repetitive muscle movements, some of them have, and some of them even make sounds. Um, and you know, very rarely they make these specific children who have mental retardation and autism. They have specific vocalizations that they make. So these are all called habitual spasms or tics. Okay, and they too are frequently associated with tiredness, stress, and even excitement and happiness. If you tell them don't do it, it tends to get worse. And Tourette syndrome is a condition where you know, this is present. Usually tics will stop in 1 or 2 months after a precipitating event. Like if you have an injury and you're used to that itch in your skin, you might be just doing it even after you get well for another week or two. But if it's just continuing for months together, for years together, then it's called Tourette syndrome. So even for them, we first focus on behavioral support and only then talk about medications. But punishing them about it and telling them don't do will not help. So these are all common things. So what is a developmental disorder as such? Okay. So a developmental disorder or disability means something, a condition which gives physical and mental impairment, which occurs before or by the age of 22 and likely to continue throughout life. And it results in functional limitations in major areas of life activity. So it can be you know, something like a cerebral palsy where there is some motor limitation associated with difficulty in vision or hearing and intelligence. It can be something that you cannot see, like a learning disability. The child looks perfectly normal. So it can, but still it limits the child's life. So that is also a developmental disorder, like ADHD. So things like that are also called developmental disorders. And then we have autism. In autism, a person has all the normal faculties. They have all the senses. They have, most of them are very intelligent or above intelligent, and still, you know, they are not able to function like us. They are not able to function as typical people. All these conditions, you know, even recurrent seizures, they are all developmental disorders. So what do we really need for major life activity? Okay, what do we really teach these children? Why are we you know, having this whole thing about you know, taking care? So what we try for all the children through all various therapies is to teach them self-care, to teach them how to take care of themselves, give them some ways to receive and express language. So receptive language means understanding, and expressive means, you know, an output for that understanding. So even if a child can't speak, we try to make them type. We try, and even if the child doesn't hear, we try to give them some instructions like a poster or picture. So we try for receptive and expressive language. We try to make them learn something. Even if a child is severe MR or quadriplegic, cerebral palsy, nowadays we try to make them learn something, even at least the, you know, recognition of people in their house, recognition of simple daily activities, that what they do, their schedule, what is there going on in the world, we still try to teach them. We try for mobility for everyone, whether it is wheelchair or any kind of frame or any kind of brace. We try for everyone to be mobile, to be able to do their daily activities. And we try for self-direction, something to motivate them to be happy. We all need that. Okay, so whenever all the therapies that we do for this. We try to increase their capacity for independent living as much as possible, and we try if they can be, you know, self-sufficient in any way. Do they have a hobby? Do they have any special talent that we need to focus on, from which they can be recognized and they can earn some income? So all therapies, after some time, we aim for this. We do occupational therapy just to teach them how to use objects. We may do physical therapy, physiotherapy, so that movement is there. We give special education, remedial education, so that they learn this in a different way. They all may not be able to read and write, so we try other ways of learning. And so we do all these therapies just in a developmental disorder for all these reasons. We want everyone, however they are, to be able to achieve this. So when someone is struggling with this, it is called a developmental disability. So, this is what really happens in their brain. They struggle with executive functions. So, you learned the cerebellar function test, right? You do finger nose test. Yeah.
Yes, ma'am. Yeah, ma'am.
So things like that, you know the signs, right? So they're not able, they do pass pointing and things like that. So this really translates into life, into difficulty in planning what you want to do. Okay, so suppose you are going for a test today. You have to know that you have to buy all your pencils, and that this chapter is this question you easily forget, so you should revise that in the last moment. Or that you have to take your bus on time or something like that. Understanding all these things before you do something is called executive function. Okay, so difficulty in that, difficulty in processing. Like many people, if you tell them once, they won't understand. You'll have to tell them differently. And even if you keep on telling also, they won't understand, so you have to tell them differently. So these are all difficult disabilities. And somebody cannot learn, like those who have dyslexia, they don't read just like you and me. And many people struggle with visuospatial processes. Many children, when they drive, they don't understand depth, they don't understand distance of a person. You see many children, if they want to talk to you, they'll come to your face and talk to you. They don't know that they have to keep in a distance and talk, or they'll just start talking and they won't know to stop. So all those are visuospatial difficulties. Sensory motor functions, if they start rocking, they will not be able to stop that rocking. If they start to jump, they will not be able to control it. They won't be able to focus their attention. They won't be able to really find the language to tell what they really think. So these are all life skills that we try as a whole team, even as teachers, as doctors. This is what we do for all these children. So you have to get support early, and therapies are very effective if started early in the child. When I told you even last time, neuroplasticity is our plan for the child. And then we also try to teach the caregivers how to understand their children and adjust according to their child. So the earlier you do this, you can hope for a better future for the child. So why is this so difficult? It's because many people are involved in this. It's a team. The doctor, the teacher, the parents, the friends, everybody should cooperate and form a team and support the child. And there should be a coordination between them. And each child is special. No general formula works for every child. So because they are so unique and everyone's learning needs are unique, we have to work as a team to teach them. And that is the problem in our country right now. We are not able to achieve this. So some common conditions which all of us will come across, I would like to highlight. So you guys have heard of ADHD? Hello?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Yes,
So
ma'am.
ADHD means attention deficit and hyperactivity. So basically it means, what to say, somebody like a squirrel and somebody like a monkey. It's usually how these kids are commonly referred to. Okay, they will not listen and they will do without thinking, and they are very difficult to control. So there are three types. They can be primarily inattentive. That means they really don't listen to what you're saying. They forget, or they don't really do completely what you say. Like you ask them to get a glass of water, they will go to the fridge and then forget that they have to get you water. They'll open the fridge and take something and go somewhere else. So that is predominant inattention. Okay. And hyperactive and impulsive means, like the name says, they have difficulty controlling their behavior. They start going to the playground, they can't wait for their turn to climb on the swing and slide. They will just start pushing. And then there is a combined type, which is most common. So the thing is, in all these children, that hyperactivity and impulsivity is very common till 3 years of age. So all toddlers are hyperactive. So we don't just call everyone ADHD. There are specific factors that we consider, because when we make a diagnosis, all these diagnoses we refer to the DSM manual. Okay, there's something called Diagnostic Statistic Manual. So they have all these conditions. We just don't immediately write like that. We check, and a lot of professionals come together, check, and make the diagnosis. So for ADHD, symptoms should start before the age of 12, and the behavior should be present both at home and at school. So if you're very nice at home and able to sit and just running around in school, it may be that you're not understanding what is happening in the class. Maybe the syllabus is not really appealing to you. And if you're really good in school and you're coming home, it means probably there is a lack of discipline or lack of motivation in the house. So it has to be present in multiple settings after age 3, before age 12, and interfere with real functioning. They're not able to enjoy their friendships. They're commonly getting into fights in the playground. Nobody wants to play with them, and they really don't want. Studies are getting affected, and there is no other, health condition like an iron deficiency that may mimic ADHD. So we rule out all this and then make a diagnosis. So really what happens is the child loses, focus like this. They look at something and get reminded of something else. It's not that they are purposefully not concentrating. It looks like that, but they really can't. So how we handle this condition is like there are medications. It is not wrong to give medications. A lot of children are given medications. There are 2 categories, stimulant drugs and non-stimulant drugs. So they basically increase norepinephrine levels, okay, and dopamine levels in the brain. They just manage these neurotransmitters. And otherwise for behavior, we try to create charts, checklists, check alarms, give a routine, use timers and use planners, basically getting them to organize their thinking. And even for parents, we task them to really break down the instructions. Don't tell them 10 things at a time, and give them definite consequences for what they do. If you break something, you have to repair it. If you push someone, you have to apologize, and you have to go back in the line and then wait your turn. So things like that consistently make them understand limits. So this is how we manage ADHD. It's a very common condition nowadays. And another thing that we really see is autism. So you always hear this thing, right? You see that autism means poor communication, poor social interaction, and repetitive behavior. But I really want to show you, I want to show you a video here. Just give me a minute. So I want you to see this kid talking, okay? Let me see.
Hello friends, welcome to Madras Summit. இன்னைக்கு நம்ம என்ன பண்ண போறோம் தெரியுமா? பரோட்டா எப்படி பண்றதுன்னு பார்க்கலாம். அதுக்கு ஃப்ரிட்ஜ்ல இருந்து ஹைட் எடுத்துங்க. தொட்டு பார்த்தா சாஃப்ட்டா இருக்கும். இப்போ ஒண்ணுல பவுல் எடுத்து அதுல போடுங்க. அப்புறம் வந்துல அது விட்டுடுங்க. அப்புறம் வந்துல கொஞ்சம் தண்ணி விடலாம். அப்புறம் தண்ணி விட்டுட்டு கையை பிசையணும். அப்புறம் பிசைஞ்சா கொஞ்சம் கையில ஒட்டுற மாதிரி தான் இருக்கும். நம்ம பிசைய சாஃப்டா இருக்கும். கையில ஒட்டாம வரும். பாருங்க, கையில ஒட்டாம வருது பாருங்க. இப்போ நம்ம கொஞ்சம் தண்ணி
Okay. Hello.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah. So she has taken one cooking class for everyone, but you notice what the child is doing. Okay. Basically, she's trying to copy someone whom she has seen. She has remembered all the steps in that process. So basic for communication is understanding a concept. Even before children talk, they get all these skills. They understand what is going on, and they use both their hands and they use their whole body to communicate. Okay, it's just not what she's talking. And you see she's adjusting with somebody. She's checking whether her mother is listening to her, and she's adapting based on what others are seeing. So these are all essential things in communication. So for normal communication, all these things are necessary. Okay, it's just like if one of this is missing, if they don't know how to explain something, even if they can talk, they still can be people on this autism spectrum. If they don't know to check along with you, many people will be going on like one radio and talking their own thing, which I'm scared like I'm doing now. Such things also are, people can be on the autism spectrum. So when they don't know to check with you, when they don't know a reciprocal interaction, and repetitive behavior that doesn't have meaning comes from confusion because of this habit. Okay, so it's just not like they don't understand the world the way a normal person understands. It's just not like multiple problems put together. And this is why there are many geniuses in who have autism also. Everybody doesn't look like a very foolish person. I don't know if you know Robbie Williams and Temple Grandin, and you all know Einstein. So this is a person from India. His name is Tito Mukhopadhyay. He's a writer. He writes many books, but he has autism and he doesn't speak. He only types. And there is a very nice book written by this person, and he's written The Reason I Jump. So all the autistic people, they say that they understand everything, but it's very difficult for them when they talk and communicate to put it all together. Like they start saying something, other things come in their brain, so they are not able to really express their thoughts. And when they see something, they don't see what we see. They see a particular thing, they get focused on one particular thing, and after that, they are not able to really get away from it. So it doesn't mean because you have ADHD or autism that you are foolish. Yes, you are peculiar. So these people need understanding, and we should have hope that even they can do well in life. So the problem that we teach, help, is through speech therapy. We have behavioral treatment. We have a unique occupational therapy for them called sensory integration. Like we, make them go on swings, make them do a lot of tactile activities. They go on the trampoline. These are all sensory integration. The vestibular sense, the vision, the hearing. We try to integrate everything so that they focus. And medications are there for very difficult behavior. And because of their struggle, these children, all of them get anxiety and aggression. All ADHD, autism children, sometimes they land up getting treatments for this. So what we really teach when somebody has autism is referencing. We try to make them look at us and understand. We slow down our behavior. We slow down our teaching. We become very calm so that they learn to look at us. We don't say, look at my face. We try from our behavior to make them look at us. We try to experience share with them. We try to say, I'm enjoying like this. We join and play with them first. We try to introduce the world to them, give lots of experience with them. We try to teach them to be calm and try to find words to communicate. If they are very calm, if they are very focused after treatments like this, they may be able to type, they may be able to draw. So we encourage them to become calm. The problem with autism is when something happens, they don't, it's called episodic memory. Okay, they do not know how to adapt to it. Like for instance, that when there is a red light, you're not supposed to cross the road. Okay, but you may also see a red line and a cross somewhere saying do not touch. We normal people, we understand that both red is a sign of danger, but these children may not understand like that. So one learning from one place does not transfer, so you have to keep on teaching them. And flexible thinking, they will not know that things are different. If they think that they go to school in a yellow bus, if the bus changes and something comes, they will not believe that it is the same bus they have to take and go. If there's a change in their timetable or change in something, these children feel a lot of anxiety. They don't realize that they have other options. So this is essentially what it is with autism. This they struggle with, this child, when she was talking with you, she was trying to remember what she was thinking. She was trying to use her gesture. She was adjusting to everyone. This all happens in normal children very beautifully. And it's so amazing that, our brains get so much of knowledge in the very early years of their life. Those who have autism, they struggle with this. And what we do in all therapy is try to teach them this. So the last condition is learning disability. So learning disability means that those who have normal IQ, normal intelligence, are not able to perform in school. Okay, like this kid in the picture, somebody is reading, but she is not able to read. But if you're going to tell this to her orally, she will understand it. It's just that when she looks at letters, she is not able to process it. So many children, it's not that if you don't study, you are, not intelligent. It's not true. There are conditions where, children have motivation to study, they have intelligence to study, but they are not able to perform simply because reading, spelling, writing is difficult for them, or they struggle with visuomotor problems. Many of them can't write within the lines. They can't write the alphabets properly. They can't write cursive. They can't, many of them, they see something, they will understand. If you give them instructions, they won't listen. So these are all learning disabilities. So when anyone comes to a doctor, who comes to a developmental pediatrician, we first check that their intelligence is normal. We do curriculum-based tests. Okay, so we try to know for age 8, for age 10, what should they know in reading, writing, and maths. We have standards for that. Like, for example, by 9 years, you should know multiplication. By 10, you should know division. So we try and test all those things. Then we find our test for cognitive abilities. Like, we give them few numbers, codes. Are they able to remember? We check all these things, and then we certify that they have a disability. If it's in reading, it's called dyslexia. It's dysgraphia if it's in writing. If it is in math, it's called dyscalculia. So we give them a diagnosis like this. So in real life, what happens when you have this is that we have something called remedial education. We have something called individualized education plan. When a child has this, gets a letter from the developmental pediatrician, they go to school, and school makes individualized educational plan for them. Okay, so we give accommodations, like for your public exam, those who have dyscalculia will be allowed to use a calculator, and they will be given some modifications, like if the question paper has to be read to them, they may not, somebody will sit and read out the question and they will write. So they will be made to sit in another room where somebody just reads the question and goes away. Some of them, if they really can't write, they have a writer. They will choose children in a standard who's younger than them, and they'll make this younger child sit with them, and this child will dictate and the younger child will write. So we have all these accommodations and modifications that all schools syllabus allows, so that these children who have a normal intelligence can progress in their life. And remediation means we try to teach them what is missing. We try to improve in step by step what skills they need. It's good if you start remediation early in life, and that is very important. Again, why we should pick this up at a very young age in life. Many of them, if they are practicing from a very young age, when they grow up, they don't need all these accommodations and modifications. So as parents, as teachers, we really should encourage kids. Encourage the kids that look bad, encourage the kids that are trouble, encourage the kids who are really eating and chewing our brain. We have to, make them come to a mindset that I may not be able to do, but with time and effort, I can do. So to come here, we really should encourage them. We should believe in them, and, like them and accept them as they are. We shouldn't really put all kids into one block and expect everyone to be the same. Everyone is different. Everyone is special. So when you guys go up and become doctors and meet children in your work, try to, be a positive person in their life. So thank you very much. Any doubts? Any doubts, kids?
No, ma'am.
Yeah, so it's clear, right?
Yeah, ma'am, it's clear.
So
Thank you so much, ma'am.
yeah, may I leave?
Thank you.
Yeah, ma'am.
Okay, thank
Thank
you.
you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, ma'am.